We make a start here. Thank you for coming to this fishbowl session. We'll figure out what that means as we go along. And I'm John Moore from University of Lapland in Finland. And I'm going to show a few slides to set the scene of what we're talking about, and then Benjamin Redmond Roche will continue a little bit, and then I'll finish off. And then we'll have our first team on the left, which we can call offense. Then we'll try to offend the audience as much as possible. And then at halftime, we will swap in the defense there, who can field all the bad stuff that we've left behind. Okay, so what are we talking about with targeted interventions? This is from the AGU report. And you can see that there is, of course, the carbon dioxide removals, and there's the solar radiation management, and then there's this third category that are essentially designed to look at what we might do to mitigate some of the most damaging harms that perhaps aren't going to be successfully tackled by solar radiation management, or indeed anything, perhaps. And that mostly includes things to do with ice, whether it's preserving the permafrost, the sea ice, or the ice sheets. So those are what we're fundamentally talking about. And one key aspect of this is that we can use experience of ongoing research that may be applicable to the wider SRM space. Now, in the general themes that I think we might address this with might be called technocratic, rational, and emotional. And it's perfectly okay to think or have questions related to any of these particular fields. But we will start off. I'm going to ask Ben now to come and talk about the particular kinds of outdoor activities or trials that might be done under the traditional, if you like, solar radiation management methodologies that we might call what we can do about the technocratic angle here. So Ben, please.
John? Okay, so by way of a brief introduction, I'm working with the Co-Create project at UCL. And so our focus is on the research governance for plausible future SRM experiments, looking mainly at SAI, MCB, and CCT or MCT. So we hosted a workshop in September with several of you in attendance. And what we wanted to do was to define the kinds of experiments, the plausible experiments that may be coming up in the future. So to do this, we'd used several different parameters to define these. So these parameters were focusing on the perturbation scale, the detectability of these experiments, the monitorability, the material released and the quantity of material released, and the estimated operational costs, in addition to the immediacy or near-term feasibility of these experiments, the reversibility, the exit ramps, and finally, the existing environmental regulations. The degree of legal oversight ranges from minimal oversight for smaller scale sort of interventions to formal screening level assessments to full environmental impact assessments where legal thresholds are exceeded. The European context is utilized here to act as a structured case study to illustrate how existing regulations may apply. Formal governance frameworks include things such as the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which calls for a precautionary pause on all climate-related geoengineering that may affect biodiversity, unless they are supported by an adequate scientific basis, have undergone prior impact assessment, are governed robustly and transparently, and most importantly, are small scale in their size and controlled. And that question of what does small scale mean and what is that definition of small scale is kind of the driving force for this research and this paper we're about to publish. So these small scale experiments would be subject to national and, moving on to this table here, which you can see for SAI, we've decided to break down these experiments into different types based on those parameters to near term, which you can see in green, mid-term, which you can see in orange, and distant term, which you can see in red. And these small-scale experiments would be subject to national and international oversight, and they would be dependent on the scale, location, and they may invoke national or international oversight. By proposing that we map these experiments onto these different frameworks, we can break them down into these near-term, mid-term, and long-term definitions, which might be a more useful way for policymakers to understand the kinds of experiments that are coming up, instead of having them just on the idea of being small-scale or large-scale, which are obviously not defined. So just briefly, these near-term green experiments are likely to, in the European context, be classified as Annex 2 projects. So these would require only an EIA screening. And so these, you can see, are small scale in the sense that they are releasing less than 1 ton of material. Midterm experiments would cross over that threshold into Annex 1 type projects, which would trigger full EIA processes and reach registration in EU law. This would require the material to be registered, and for releases over 10 tons, this would require a full chemical safety report to be submitted for the material being released. And then long term, these would move into the next level, would have strict environmental assessments required, and they would also start to raise policy level discussions based on the SEA law in Europe. They'd also raise transboundary impact protocols such as the ESPOR Convention and the LRTAP. So with these slides here, you can see that there is a range. We identified 6 SAI experiments during the workshop, and you can imagine that experiments 1 to 2 would be what a ScopeX type experiment would be considered as. We also identified 5 MCB experiments, and you can see these also range in size to a large scale of over 100 tons at the maximum end of sea salt aerosols being released. And you could imagine that small existing experiments such as the Great Barrier Reef, what the University of Washington experiment would have considered, and the EPEACE trials might be pushing around an experiment 2 or 3 on this list here. And the final one for cirrus cloud thinning, which is a much less understood subject, we were able to identify 3 experiments. And I think what's interesting about this is that you can imagine cloud seeding operations, which are currently ongoing around the world. They would fall somewhere in between experiment number 1 and 2. So the final thing we've been doing is we've actually been trying to create case studies that are tangible for policymakers to actually understand what these experiments may look like in the real world. So what we've done, our case studies range from number 1 there, you can see a small-scale SAI experiment in the Seychelles, looking essentially at what stakeholder engagement should look like, all the way through to number 5, which you can see is a large-scale SAI experiment involving 1,000 tons of SO2 in northern Finland. So this is something we're exploring tomorrow in another session tomorrow afternoon, so please come along if you're in an interactive session, so please come along to that if you're interested in these. But these are also published on the Co-Create website.
More of your slides, but okay. Yes. So, going back to this concept of what are targeted interventions, because everything that Ben was just talking about is kind of purely from the technocratic point of view. But we've already established that any decision maker wants to know about things like moral hazard and what kinds of political benefits or demerits there might be in terms of electability over the short term. So what we have been doing in consultation with the University of the Arctic, which is a 200-member institution focused on the peoples of the Arctic, a very grassroots organization, is to collect all the ideas that have been put out there on potential ways of conserving the cryosphere, permafrost, sea ice, and glaciers. And there were 61 different ideas that we identified. And we looked at them over a range of different criteria, 12 different criteria, and tried to roughly classify them. The second phase of this process is to try to look with the perspectives of the indigenous community that's led by the Sami Council, which of course were instrumental in getting the Scopex experiment in Kiruna banned, and the academic perspective is a kind of mini IPCC. And we are focusing in the first stage on things like on the sea ice sheets and atmospheres, and particularly with emphasis on the timeliness and scalability. And this process will continue through this year and next. And the indigenous phase is done through various suitable methodologies that they can solicit their expertise from. And then we basically put these things together. Hopefully we've got the 61 ideas down to maybe 10, let's say, that might be acceptable, but they will certainly have gaps in them, and you need to fill these knowledge gaps in the promising ideas as quickly as possible, and of course essentially stop wasting time on the ones that are not acceptable for whatever reason as we go along. So this is the kind of rational way forwards, but there's the problem that it comes up very much that you simply cannot reason someone out of a position they were not reasoned into. And to do any progress, individuals essentially rely on their feelings, their heart, if you like. And that has led us to consider this concept of compassionate harm reduction, with the concept that we have, as scientists or activists or policymakers, a moral obligation to try to reduce the amount of harm from climate change as much as possible. And that means thoroughly investigating any particular option that might be out there. And in a way, this is related to the concept of solastalgia, where people are emotionally missing the environment such as it exists at the moment. So it's somewhat analogous to nostalgia. And fundamentally, this comes down to love, a love of place, a love of our fellow humans, and a sense of universality instead of selfishness that might be applicable. So, as I said at the beginning, all of these aspects, the technocratic, the reason, and the emotional, are fair game for discussion in this fishbowl panel. And I think that's the end of the presentation there. And so now what I'd like to do is invite the first team to take a position. Assume the position, please. So we've got, who have we got? I have to remember everyone's name. So we've got Dante McGrath from the University of Cambridge. And I'd like to introduce Dante by way of a question. So Dante has been involved in the Great Barrier Reef marine cloud brightening, and that's generally seen as a success in terms of intervention outdoor activity. So Dante, please explain how you found the successful way forwards.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so just to clarify as well that, so I'm a research associate at the Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge, and we're working on the nozzle development side of things when it comes to marine cloud brightening. And in that work, we are collaborating with Southern Cross University, who are involved in a program in Australia, which I'm about to talk about. So there are two major points I want to raise just in the opening salvo, which is just to characterise the blueprint that the Australian team have set for future cloud brightening and indeed SRM experiments. And so the first point I'd raise is start with the why. So addressing the motivation behind field experiments out on the reef. And so the why is quite clear to Australians, and it's the impact of coral bleaching, mass bleaching events in heat wave conditions. And the scientific organisations in Australia have been monitoring the reef since the 80s, and have noticed an increased frequency and severity of mass bleaching events in the past decade, and even back-to-back bleaching events, which are especially harmful owing to the inability for coral to recuperate from bleaching, which is a natural process. So it's with these consequences that the Australian government set up the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program, which you'll hear as RAP by shorthand. And that program fostered research into a whole range of possible solutions that are not just engineering, but so that we have marine biologists working on coral resilience, so cultivating heat-resilient coral, but also this cooling and shading sub-program that I've been involved with. And in that line of work, field experiments of marine cloud brighting have been run since 2020, and I was very fortunate to be involved in the campaign in 2024 in February, which happened to be a bleaching year. And so the framing of that campaign was key to its success. The fact that Australians care very much about the reef, and indeed the indigenous people that hold claim to that land and sea country. And so that brings me to our second point, which is the involvement of local communities and indigenous peoples. And so one example in particular is the involvement of a team of indigenous peoples working on the drone measurements. Drone tests to measure things like relative humidity, updraft velocity, wind speed, and temperature. And all that's to say is it covers that technocratic theme that we've seen, but also builds that capacity and knowledge that we heard in this morning's plenary of local communities and indigenous peoples. And so by building in that knowledge capacity and that involvement of Aboriginal peoples in that capacity, in that line of work, builds a platform of success in future experiments and establishes trust. And so I think that's a key to success with the RAP program. And that's all I want to say just now.
Thank you very much, Dante. And now we will have Ellen Haaslahti, please, from Operatio Arctis, which you will all see.
Thanks, John.
And so, Ellen, I read your master's thesis with the
impressive,
slightly daunting title. But perhaps you can, I think it was interesting for people to hear about your Delphi technique when it came to grilling Finnish climate experts' attitudes to SRM. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, happy to. Nice to be here. Thank you all for coming. I think this morning in the plenary, Ernest Ofori and Babatunde Abiodun put it well that the introductions, the way we introduce SRM matters to the formation of perceptions. And that also applies among experts, of course, which was evident in this in my study, where I had 18 climate change experts who came from different backgrounds and knowledge systems to contribute to this Delphi study, which is a foresight method, basically a survey where they anonymously reply to multiple choice questions, and they put in arguments why they replied this way, and then they're able to change their answers as well. So it's this kind of like reflective process of forming perceptions for SRM. And some of them were also working with SRM and some were not, so a lot of variation with familiarity with the topic, and that also gave variation with the findings. Some of my key findings were that, firstly, these experts in Finland clearly supported more research and research efforts going into SAI and MCP, and based on their arguments, this was perceived as a precaution to be more informed and prepared for different future scenarios. Secondly, regarding policy preferences, it was clear that internationally coordinated and science-based approaches were more preferred to maybe more national and restrictive and market-based approaches. And finally, I think what was really important was that in the background there was clear pessimism about our ability to achieve sufficient decarbonization in time, and also the ability of the global governance to put forward equitable climate governance. And this really influenced the way people were thinking about SRM and whether certain research activities and developments are likely or desirable to them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very shortly.
And can I ask Dante and Ben, and we sit in these chairs now, and Ben already introduced himself a little bit, and I did as well, and you notice there's a figuratively empty chair there, which is designed for an audience member to sit in, but I think what we'll do is keep it figuratively filled with whoever wants to ask a question, just to, in the interest of time, to do this. And so I will now open it up to the audience to ask any of us, if I can get this thing off, to reply, or maybe I'll just leave it there.
So for the two really great examples of indigenous engagement, for the RAP example, I'd really love to know how that engagement process went to the point where you're able to get that local community involved in actually doing some of the science. What was the process leading up to that? And then I guess John and Ellen, and I don't know the degree in co-create, but maybe also Ben. So you mentioned the Sami Council had gone from the maybe main force scuttling ScopeX to a driving force in bringing forward responsible research. How did that transition happen?
So I could give my short response, but I wonder, we do have the scientific lead of RAP, but would you like me to give a crack, or Dan, would you like to respond to the first question regarding RAP? Have a go. let me try it on, and you can. It's pretty easy. We asked them. Yeah. So I think there was what's in formal speak, I think that means a steering committee. There was a steering committee in place with RAP, which involved the local community, Indigenous peoples, dating back to 2018.
RAP didn't exist yet.
No.
So traditional owner engagement started long before RAP, and literally, thank you. Literally, I went there and I explained the project and invited them. But in terms of the bigger RAP, traditional owner engagement, once RAP did start, we voluntarily made it a hard and fast rule that we would only do any research in RAP on traditional owner sea country with their free, prior and informed consent. So, in practice, this involves a fair bit of coordination because there are a lot of different projects, and you can easily risk burning out traditional owner groups, sort of dragging them to too many meetings when they'd rather be doing something else. But I think one of the most important aspects is sort of going back repeatedly, and also having people involved that can help the scientists. Scientists are not great at engagement, traditionally speaking. So having a support team there that can engage with the traditional owners on the scientists' behalf to set up the meetings, have the scientists along as the subject matter experts to answer questions. And then after that, it depends a little bit on the individual scientists. Personally, I really like engaging with traditional owners, so I've been to cultural events, I go visit them. It's about building a personal relationship as much as trying to tick a box.
Thanks, that's great. And I think it's a rather similar story. Maybe this is Tolstoy's All Happy Families Are Alike, that the same with the Sami Council, that University of the Arctic have 25 years of engagement with them, and you build long-term relationships and trust over that time. Not that I can speak for the Sami Council or anything, and as they say, we're in a position where we don't trust anybody, so your actions have to back up your words. And the way that we are doing the process, we thought a long time about not having an intimidatory approach where you have some, professor guy going to a village with all kinds of qualifications, and these guys don't have anything to back that up. So we left the local communities to do it exactly, or the Sami Council to do it exactly how they want to do it. And they will just make periodic reports of how they've had meetings, and eventually, in some as yet undefined form, we will bring these things together and hopefully find that we have some areas of agreement about where to go forward.
Yeah, I can echo with these answers. I'm also a co-founder and head of communications for Operaatio Arctis, that you might know, based in Helsinki, Finland. We're a climate strategy agency and also focusing on climate intervention and science advocacy there. And we have maybe a closer relationship with the Sami Parliament in Finland rather than the Sami Council, but they're of course tightly connected. And that was basically where we started. Was in 2023. We were able to get 2 new team members into our own team who were Sami youth, and just by actually there has been now 3rd one joining, and we're kind of like they're part of our learning process that we're also doing about climate interventions. And by involving them, we were able to get representation from the Sami Parliament as well to our event, and it was really successful. And at the moment, this person is actually the president of the Sami Parliament in Finland, Pirita Näkkäläjärvi, who is very engaged with us and very interested to be involved in the discussions. And I think she usually emphasized that the main motivation for her are the increasing climate risks, and that the Sami really have the interest to preserve their winters and their livelihoods in this way. So it's important for them to be engaged. But of course, the indigenous peoples or the Sami people are not monolithic. So we need to increase capacity building in order to have more diverse and nuanced discussions with these groups.
And just to add, I think another nice example is the Nunavut Agreement, of where indigenous knowledge is utilised really well, and respect is in place for these traditional people in these areas. So if you are doing field experiments or doing a climate intervention experiment in Nunavut, you must have their buy-in and support of indigenous peoples. So I think that is another nice lesson that maybe we can use in other areas as well.
Anybody else? Hopefully, otherwise it's a very short session.
I guess for many of these, sorry, yeah, I'm Alistair Duffy. I'm a PhD student at University College London. I work mostly on Arctic response to stratospheric aerosol injection. I'm interested in thoughts on social license for the kind of SEI field trials that Ben showed in his slides. I think it's quite clear how social license can work around very localized interventions, barrier reef, certain ice interventions. It's kind of clear who to ask. How do we move forwards towards doing any of the scales of experiment that Ben showed in his slide in a socially licensed way for SAI?
Should I start? Yeah. That's a big question, and I think it comes back to the discussion yesterday about balancing between urgency and patience. One thing that came to my mind that I see as important, we have had a workshop on that topic last fall, and something I noticed was that it would be very important to recognize the people who are most vulnerable to climate impacts, and also bridge them together. For example, in the Arctic and also here in Africa, bring these people together and find what kind of common interests they might have, what kind of climate intervention project could be mutually beneficial for the others in the Arctic, the ice is melting, and for others, the sea levels are rising. And in the workshop that I was participating to, some of the Arctic indigenous representatives were saying that they were really cautious about climate interventions, but they said that it would be definitely like in the interests of indigenous peoples if someone else who is also vulnerable would kind of like be interested in talking about it. So bringing these people together to find common motivations could be something that could be helpful in forming that social license.
Yesterday, I heard Ted Parson give, I think, the most cogent argument of how you would actually get SAI started in a way. And his view was that essentially doing any SAI was better than doing no SAI, no matter how badly you did it, given the information that we have of not doing it pathologically badly, like all over one location or something weird like that. But if you did it in anything approaching a sensible way, the outcomes were going to be better than not doing it. I think that's an interesting argument to go forward, but I didn't find it completely convincing, because you still have to go through a whole bunch of technological refinement of how you would go about doing it and selecting the material. And it's, for my mind, impossible to conceive that you wouldn't have multiple trials at different scales, like Ben showed, just to avoid going into a dead end, you know? You don't want to large scale a fleet of planes and then find out, oh, you've fitted them all with the wrong stuff. You have to start at some sensible level. And then you need to get some kind of consent for the people that this is going to be done near. And whether that's in the Arctic, and whether that is, for example, close by to some airfield that can support the plane that might be delivering those things, or whether you did it from a balloon, or however you did it, there will be some local people that need to have a say on it.
How do you define near when you're saying that? I mean, especially with the stratosphere. You said the people who are near, but how do you define near? If you're putting particles in the stratosphere, they're going to fall out somewhere else completely differently. So who's the local people? And if and is it where one particle falls, or is it where some concentration of particle falls, or is it where the injection's happening?
I think that's what Ben was showing with his different scales, so that you have essentially zero impact for like even up to the yellow scales, and you don't need to do an environmental impact assessment. You absolutely do need the social license to go ahead and do it.
Right, but I'm asking, who do you ask for social license when there's no physical impact to anyone? Is it where you're doing the ground below where you're doing the injection, or is it all the people that are going to be underneath the plume that has some concentration? Because if none of it has any concentration that's going to have any physical impact, is it just... Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, totally.
I don't think it's as straightforward as what you're saying is all.
Say something, Ben?
So I think the transboundary issue is one of the most unanswered questions we have in SRM, and the idea of who is a stakeholder is, of course, one of the most important questions we need to try and answer. There is no obvious answer. There is no obvious solution, and that is through the case study work. We actually try and just raise those questions, and the fact that policymakers need to be having these discussions. I don't try and offer an answer, because we could be sat here all day discussing that. I think back to Ali's question, though, which was the idea of what is the way that we can have conversations with when everyone's involved. And I think the one idea that might work is utilising the Montreal Protocol, the Montreal Treaty, because of the fact it's the only climate or environmental agreement that is still unanimously agreed to with every country in the world. So there is research they're doing through that on SRM governance, and I think that is the best bet potentially for us to actually have something which we can in place where everyone is involved.
Yeah, maybe we can add just one more thing to that is that what I think is really important, well, thinking about that kind of like transboundary method, what maybe matters to people, although it's like in the atmosphere it's not clear what is local, but what matters to people is probably where it will be like started, like where the test will sort of be run. It's probably something that matters to people, and these local people then should be maybe included well enough. And something that's very important is the social license when thinking about indigenous peoples is the free, prior, and informed consent. And what I think we should put a lot more effort in thinking about how to apply that in practice in different climate intervention approaches, because that way, like showing that we think about this and we want to apply it and we apply it, we can also build trust, and that in itself also creates the social license to see that these kind of principles work.
And just in my own personal theory of change, these small targeted interventions might be the confidence building and trust building measures that you can demonstrate to people that you can improve their local ways of life, and maybe that opens their hearts to considering more large scale things from that introduction to it.
I think I have a comment about how to define who the stakeholders are. And I want to use the example of a MIR versus, say, something like SAI. Because in MIR, we do localized thermal adaptation, and there's a huge impact, up to 10 degrees Celsius cooling for the particular household or the field that's benefiting from the technology. And also, as you move away from the site, as a function of distance, you have a measurably smaller impact. So one can weigh the contribution or the relevance to a particular person by the actual impact on that person compared to the control experiment. Assuming we have perfect models that replicates the Earth, we can certainly define who the stakeholders are and assign weights to them. The problem is that we don't have such models in place. And in the case of SAI, the impact will be distributed globally, more or less equally. In that sense, everybody is an equal stakeholder, not only where it's launched.
I think that feeds into what Ben mentioned in terms of drawing on the Montreal Protocol as far as a template for success when it comes to collective action problems, which is what we have here, is a collective action problem. One term that resonated with me this morning in the plenary was preparedness. We use that phrase in the context of pandemic preparedness, and I think we could apply the same logic and precaution to SRM, the notion that the impacted communities, be it Global South or Arctic communities, it's in their interest to build up knowledge and involvement in SRM understanding and research, to prepare for the situations in which they may be deployed.
I think it's time to swap our teams over. So I will do the first introduction of the new chair, captain of the team, which is Shaun Fitzgerald from University of Cambridge Centre for Climate Repair. And Shaun, by way of an introduction, you can answer this particular question. So you have a very broad portfolio in the centre, Climate Centre. So can you outline what rationale you have that unifies these into a nice, coherent whole that I'm sure you've given a lot of thought to?
There's only one way down from a question like that, which is down. So cutting to the chase, if you really want the answer to the question, then there is a paper about to be published in Global Sustainability, first author Dante McGrath, which actually lays out the Centre for Climate Repair and what we mean by climate repair. We mean by climate repair, starting with emissions reduction, and the importance of that cannot be understated. Because if we don't do emissions reduction, we may as well just give up on everything else because we're absolutely mullered. So emissions reduction, number one. Number two is greenhouse gas removal. And I'm sure I don't need to educate people in this room, but the greenhouse gas removal is necessary to get to this thing called net zero. So even if you don't like carbon dioxide removal and things like that, because some people think it may be a form of geoengineering or whatever that is. We need it, and it's accepted by politicians by them just invoking the term net zero. Net zero is not sufficient. We need to get to net negative in order to drain the bathtub of the dirty water, that is the atmosphere, of excess greenhouse gases. And then thirdly, what we call refreeze, just because it's convenient to have a third R, but it's possibly not because it's the right term to use, but actually the general sort of issue here is that there are other things that we need to consider in order to keep a lid on temperatures and to ameliorate the worst effects of climate change, and especially thinking of those who are going to be most affected by the effects of climate change and least able to adapt. So that includes undertaking research in things like stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, and a raft of others as well. So that's my possibly long answer, John, to your short question. But paper, global sustainability. Yeah, can we bring up the slides that John shared at the very beginning of the team? This is the offense. I did think the offense and defense. I'm very glad I'm not being offensive and therefore being more on the defense. Perfect. Right. So I'm now going to invite Marianne to come and join me as well. So Marianne is from the University of the Arctic, Norway. Marianne, you have a very rich and colourful career. And not all of it has just been spent in the area of climate interventions. So would you like to just share with us about your experience in big business and in the political arena, and actually how that might therefore be helpful as we navigate our path forward in trying to first develop our understanding of potential interventions, targeted interventions, and then ultimately thinking about if any of them may well one day be deployable.
Thank you, Shaun. Yes, I've been doing everything but climate interventions, I would say. I've only been in this space for a year and a half or 2 years already. So my last experience was I was Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. So I think what is kind of useful for this group and this conference is to build on what Pascal Lamy talked to us about this morning, about the coalition, building a coalition of the willing, because we are not getting anywhere unless we have the politicians and the decision makers kind of on board one way or another. So then the question is, who are the willing? I don't see any hands in the air. So then the question for this group is, how do we actually create a willing politician? And in order for us to succeed in that, we need to understand kind of who are they. And of course, they're different in different countries. But what kind of is the same for all of them? They want to be popular. That means that we kind of need to understand that they need to be re-elected, most of them. And they also want to be, and that's much more interesting for us, they want to be knowledgeable. They want to learn. They want to be ahead of things. They want to know, they want to be the one in the room that knows what's going on. And in this area, a lot is going on. It's not popular, but it gives them an edge. This is going on. I think that for us, or for you as scientists, this is not the time to be shy, to reach out. We don't have time to be shy. We don't have a lot of time at all, actually. And you all have your own politicians on one level, regional or national levels. Find one of them, 2 of them, reach out. And then, when you sit down with them, make it simple. Give them mental pictures that they can understand and they can share with their constituents. That doesn't mean that you oversimplify. You can give them the background and the real science as well, but give them something that they can use as an elevator pitch later. And then, super important is make an ask. A politician that gives you an hour of his or her time, they need to know when the meeting is over, what do you expect her or he to do for you? And that's the thing you have to think about before you go into the meeting. So ask for governance, ask for give them a role at the conference, invite them, give them something that they have to prepare for. That's helpful. And then, most importantly at the end, make it relevant. And we are, as a group, as far as my observation, is that we are kind of afraid of controversy. We live in an age of controversy. Controversy is a media war, it's a battle. But if we continue to be super polite, don't want to step on anybody's toes, we don't want to, make a controversy, we don't want to polarize the discussion, I don't think we're going to get there. So use any landslide, any wildfire, any extreme weather event to reach out to the politician that you believe can actually be interested. Make it relevant for them. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you ever so much indeed. And now we're going to also be joined by Bridget Shayka from Ocean Visions. And my opening salvo to you, Bridget, is if you would please share with us what kinds of insights might you be able to share with us as a result of the road mapping exercise that you've undertaken for the Arctic.
Yeah, so quickly I'll just introduce Ocean Visions. We're a nonprofit and we sit at the interface of the ocean and climate crises. So I think about the ocean maybe more than the atmosphere on a day-to-day basis. And we come into this space from the context of thinking about how to prevent critical marine ecosystems from being damaged or destroyed in a way that is irreparable. And so climate interventions come up in that conversation. And so we have begun our work by thinking about the first marine ecosystem as Arctic sea ice. And we undertook an exercise to assess the interventions that have been proposed to potentially slow the loss of Arctic sea ice. And that includes a wide range of interventions that people have considered, all the way from protection-based, area-based protections, all the way to SAI. And so intervention meant a lot of things in that space. And mostly what we have learned from this work is that there are a lot of unknowns, which I think the scientists in the room all agree with. And these unknowns span a range of things from actual research questions and technology questions to governance questions to engagement with communities or people involved. And I think in order to address these, in creating the roadmap, we formed an interdisciplinary advisory board with experts from different countries and different fields that had varying levels of interest and experience with interventions. And I think that is maybe a lesson that can be carried forward into actually doing these approaches. It's forming interdisciplinary teams, really bringing in different perspectives, not just on the approach itself, but on the potential impacts, thinking about bringing in social scientists and ecologists into work on SAI, for example, and allowing diverse scientists to think about this work will also allow for the research itself to have a broader scope and to take into the considerations of a broader range of people in the world.
Great, thank you. And finally, we're going to be joined by Viktor Jaakkola, another representative of Operatio Arctis. Now, Viktor, my question to you is that you're a relatively young organisation, but actually, in terms of the degree of traction that we have seen as a result of your activities, really quite impressive. Lessons learned that you might be able to share with us, especially perhaps regarding your very local context in Finland and the local community, and in particular the government in Finland as well.
So why we have gained so much traction in such a short time? Well, I think one pretty central thing is that we're pretty close as a team. We came from the climate movement, where we were already functioning from maybe this John Moore's compassion and harm reduction and love perspective. And then from when people see this, I think it's pretty easy for them to understand that we are not a part of the fossil fuel industry for one. And in that sense, maybe the Sami Council, who John said doesn't trust anyone, maybe they trust us a little bit more than some other actors who seem more suspicious. We are able to function independently, which is really, really important. We don't want to be influenced too strongly or controlled by others, which of course gives us the freedom to think for ourselves and also act in ways that we deem ethical or good for the world as a whole.
That's great. Okay. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is open up the floor to questions. And what I'm going to ask is if you can keep your questions brief. And then I'm also going to ask the panelists, or me included, that is, to try and keep our answers brief so that we can include as many people from around the room as possible in the 20-25 minutes that we've got left. So who's going to like to go first? Ben. So short question and then short answers, okay? Ben, over to you.
You're going to hate me because it's actually more of an observation, but just regarding...
we need a question in there as well, Ben.
Yeah, I would do that. But an observation regarding Finland, your success in such a short time and the fact you've had buy-in from the Finnish Meteorological Institute and climate scientists expressing their support for SRM. I wonder whether that's due to the fact that in Finland there is such a focus on critical thinking, and in schools in Finland they ensure that deepfakes and troll factories and things like that are sussed out and people can identify them from a young age. And this focus on critical thinking is clearly something which might be critical for SRM to develop, and I'm just wondering if there's anything you'd like to say to that.
Yeah, that could play a part, and also Finnish people are trusting of science. This is not the case everywhere in the world, and also authority and institutions like the police or scientists, people generally trust them more in Finland than in other places. Also media, yeah, pretty high level. Yeah, I think on some scoring internationally, our media is one of the least corrupt, perhaps, in the world. Yeah. Also, maybe I wanted to add one very important thing, and that is that the SRM scene, as I call it, has been very welcoming towards Operaatio Arctis, and we would not be where we are today without the support from people like John and Shaun and Ocean Visions and all the rest of the folks. So a big thank you to you all.
Great. Okay, so I quite like the use of the phrase the least corrupt rather than the most admired. I mean, and it says a lot about the industry about which you were then commenting. Right, next question, please. From Make Sense. Yes.
Marianne, your comment that we don't have time to be shy really struck a chord with me, obviously. And at the same time, this seems to me a bit of a contrast. Why should there be any extra legal requirements for targeted interventions of any type to try to improve the world when extractive industries certainly are not imposing extra legal requirements on them as they, ruin it?
Okay, that's a good question. Who would like to take that first? Marianne first.
Here. I think it's an interesting question, but I do, and I wish there wasn't a difference, but I do think it's a difference because I don't know this, but I would assume that people in general do not go around and fear extractive industries, even though maybe they should. But when this topic of geoengineering is presented to people, they actually feel fear. And I think if, going back to the politicians, he needs to be popular, or she does. She or he needs to be re-elected. And if this is something that scares the shit out of people, it doesn't fly. And also, the holistic part of me, I think it's the right thing to develop this kind of universal understanding that this is something that we do because we love the earth and we want the next generation to be as well off as we are. So I think we need it. I think it's a good step on the way. But being in this space for 2 years, and I'm stopping now, I'm kind of losing patience. And that's, I don't see, there's an underwhelming interest from the political side, which I think is scary. I think that the community that we have is completely different. I get so uplifted when I'm with all of you folks, and then I leave the front doors of the hotel on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, and then it's a different world outside. They don't see anything that we see and talk about in here, and that is super confusing. So I'm kind of conflicted.
Cool. Viktor, would you want to have a go as well? Or anything to add?
On the idea that why is this not just one other sector of industry, in a sense, was that kind of... perhaps I can't speak for indigenous people, like the Sami, for example, but I'd imagine that, for example, mining and railroads and roads and wind farms and all these extractivist kind of expansions into their territory might be bigger fears than interventions that are now something that they are able to participate in framing. And so, yeah, that's interesting. I also started thinking about what Thelma Krug said yesterday about SRM needs to be within a context. And I think that there are as many contexts as there are minds, essentially, in the world. So, yeah, depends on what kinds of fights you're fighting, if this is a like really big question for you or just a smaller one.
Great. We'll take a question from the gentleman with the beard first. Your hand was up first.
I'd like to thank John for bringing up the need for caring for people and not doing harm. I guess the question is for everybody to think about how do we quantify that? Because it seems to be very much dependent on the trajectory we're going into the future. So let's say in the scenario that we deployed a SAI and very quickly cooled down and everything turns to business as usual, exponential growth, we reach 15 billion people by the end of the century, then we run out fossil fuel, everything crashes. Then how do we quantify? Is the suffering proportional then to the number of people? And then there's the Sami that we have to be consulting and get their buy-in on experiments. But there's 90,000 Samis, based on what I just checked. What about the 3 billion Indians and Africans? Their lives will eventually be impacted because we have started a certain trajectory of the world. So how do we do such calculus quantitatively of caring for people?
So how do we how do we calculate the caring for people? Who wants to go for this first?
This is all yours.
This is me. Yeah. I can say something. Yeah, please.
Okay, I think that of course the needs of the many cannot outweigh the rights of the few. But in my opinion, there is no inherent conflict that needs to be assessed. You know, there can be winners and there should be no losers, and I believe that we have enough degrees of freedom in these kinds of interventions to pilot a pathway such that you do not have losers.
Very good. Viktor, would you like to add?
Yeah, one idea that I've been struggling a little bit with is that people's perceptions regarding interventions will probably change going into the future. So people who might today be very skeptical or scared about them or not really see the need for them might think differently in 20 or 30 years' time. Or my guess is that they will. And this means, can I somehow impose some type of power or control over people that are more ignorant about what interventions are or how they're needed? Do I have the right to sort of assert some, I don't know, strong opinions furthering research, even if a lot of people wouldn't really see the need for it? I don't know.
Great. Okay, we're going to move to the next question, but I did like the use of the word care. And I've heard moral hazard, I've heard moral obligation in terms of the written context. I actually haven't heard that much about actually this is a caring thing that one's trying to do. Can I take the question, please?
Sure. Let's add one thing on that topic. Just very quick.
Yep.
And it's kind of directed towards Bridget about oceans, because oceans look so beautiful and blue and clean, and yet they're not that healthy, and we do need to intervene. And how do you persuade people that maybe intervention in something which looks lovely is needed?
We'll have that as an open question hanging there, okay? Seriously, can we come? I'm going to just take a question from the back, and then we're going to come back to the Blue Ocean.
So I'd like to thank all of the presenters. My name is Patrick Papanian. I'm here with the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. Yep. I'm a novice in this field. I'm a communication strategist, and so my questions are going to be about communications. And it's not just for the panelists, and I know you're a communication specialist in your organization, but how many of you with your research grants have some sort of communications element to it? That so you have a budget to convene meetings with policymakers, or to at least present something to the media, or I'm curious about, did you do any film work with these indigenous groups? That's one question for everyone. And the other question is for the group doing the work in Australia. What sort of linkages do you have with the coral reefs on the Red Sea? Because I don't see any Middle Eastern representatives here, or North African. I live in Egypt and I've worked there, and I'm very curious to see that knowledge transferred. So as a communication strategist, I'm looking for social capital that is bonding and bridging.
We need to,
and that's what we're asking about.
Okay,
Are you building social capital that is bonding and bridging?
Okay, so on the communications, actually, so can I ask Ocean Visions to, and then also can you maybe use the ocean example as an answer?
Oh, wow. Okay, so many things to address. Trying to get people to care about the oceans is similar in scope maybe to getting people to care about all sorts of other things, whether it's the Arctic or climate interventions. When people don't have immediate familiarity with it, there's a lot of difficulty in getting people to care about it. So there's certainly something to be said for the benefits of going outside, I suppose. But I think something that I've heard repeatedly over the last day is trying to make things tangible to people individually, to their local space and their local lives. And that is one way to connect people to these issues and things that you think they should care about, but they don't know about or don't care about. Okay, let's see, communication. So at Ocean Visions, we are trying to move forward with some versions of communications related work. And we generally, we target our communications work towards audiences of what we call decision makers. So we're not necessarily going like door to door to talk to people about climate interventions, but we're trying to convene scientists or people leading climate organizations or people with government expertise or groups like that to advance this topic, which actually sounds quite similar to many of the comments I've heard people make over the last day about who they are also trying to talk to. So I find that to be interesting and an important overlap. But we find that defining who our audience is a really important way to begin communication work. Yeah.
For those interested, at the end of this session, I will show a 5-minute video on exactly this topic, which I think is it's been proven to be very emotionally effective.
Great. Okay. We had a question at the front. Thank you ever so much indeed. So I should have asked, can you make sure you introduce yourself? Excellent introduction, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, Shaun Fitzgerald from Healthy Climate Initiative. We do targeted climate intervention in the Himalayas to slow the melting of glaciers. Started doing that last October, have a good result. Also, we do traditional work of rewilding with indigenous people. My question to you, when you are doing this Arctic work with the Sami Council, indigenous people, how do you get them engaged in scientific technology work? Because both of them are coming from a very different world. And I find it very, I mean, I grew up with the indigenous people. I work with many other indigenous people across India. In India, you have thousands of different kinds of indigenous people.
Yep.
So curious to know how you do that.
Okay. Well, maybe to begin with, I don't think it's that much about getting indigenous people to understand Western science. It's probably more about us Western scientists understanding or learning from their perspective and their needs and their knowledge of how their environment works and what's important for them and what's not, and so on. Do you want to?
Yes, thank you. I just thought that I would give you one example. I'm working on the seabed curtain project, which is looking at if it's possible to delay the sea level rise by delaying the melting of a few specific glaciers in Greenland and in Antarctica. But of course, you cannot start by deploying something gigantic in Antarctica. Nobody would do that. So what we are trying to do is to deploy a curtain in a fjord in mainland Norway, where the Sami people live along the fjord. So our plan is to, and we already started this, is to engage with them. So a very concrete example is that they use this fjord for subsistence fisheries. So what we are going to do is we are going to connect with a few families, and then they are going to monitor the catch they get for one whole year before we deploy a curtain, during the year where the curtain is in the fjord, and then 1 year after the curtain is removed. And that way we can engage concretely with something of the indigenous people in the local area that means something to them, and kind of engage them in the project. So that's one way of moving forward.
And I mean, I will also contribute. So I'm part of a project which there's a poster on it, the session immediately following this on re-thickening of Arctic sea ice. It's a research project, but one of the key ingredients of any work that is undertaken with the field is actually working with the local people. Actually, and I'm just to re-echo what Viktor said, they've got a lot to teach us. So you then share, you explore ideas, and actually, it's not a one-way knowledge exchange. It's a very much two-way, and I would argue at the moment, it seems that we've been learning rather more than they have in terms of the process.
We'll talk after the session.
Yeah, and maybe also I want to add that indigenous people are often like physicists or scientists who have studied like Western science as well, so that they might be very knowledgeable in it. Yeah.
Okay. Any more other questions? Yes, Michael.
So, Marianne, I might put you in the hot seat, but for others too. Oh, by the way, I'm Michael Diamond from Florida State University. In the United States, the conversation around climate intervention is still very small, but it's getting very polarized and brought into the culture wars. Do you have any advice for when you are talking to politicians, et cetera, of how do you depoliticize or try to get this out of the political maelstrom and back to some more higher principles, maybe?
I do not know if any advice would help the situation in the US right now. And it will pass. That's the only hope. No, it will pass. It will pass. Everything does. So I don't have an answer for the US, but I do think that we can stand more controversy. We can survive more debate because it engages people. And when they are engaged, they're also kind of open for information. Right now, I don't see any appetite for this question at all because it's not on the agenda. It's just not on the agenda. So I think a little bit more temperature would not hurt. So I would welcome that. But there are degrees to everything.
I mean, I'm going to also just chip in. So I have had a few more inquiries from our own civil service. So these are not politicians, but the machinery behind those politicians in the UK as a result of various things that have happened, and actually just asking, Shaun, could you come and share some, give us 40 minutes of your time as a sort of an appraisal, or an appraisal rather, of what's going on in the field, why is it important, and where it sits. So yes, there are lots of people that we can seek to engage, but sometimes it's the civil servants who actually do last longer than the politicians. So in terms of just the return on your knowledge, return on your time, and therefore the knowledge that's imparted, sometimes working with the civil servants can actually be quite a good thing.
Can I just add one thing? Because I think that the situation in the US right now, it also creates a fantastic opportunity for the rest of us.
It does. Well, how very...
And I mean that, because you see the EU uniting, you see new coalitions of the willing nations are formed. So I think it's also an opportunity for us. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to move to the next question. Annelot. Sorry, introduce yourself, please. Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Annelot, and I'm from Delft in the Netherlands. So adding to what you were saying, Shaun, so a few weeks ago, me and my colleagues went to the Ministry of Defense. And we talked to all these civil servants. And actually, we did a polling there, and we asked, okay, now we told you 30 minutes about climate interventions and risks of climate change. And then we asked them, okay, so do you think we should research it or not? And then I think 99% were saying yes, so that was good. And then we continued the conversation, and we were saying, okay, so to advance the research, we should also do some field trials. And then the civil servants who were actually like knowledgeable about geoengineering, how they call it, they were like, oh, what? And then they stepped back a little bit. So my question, I think maybe for Marianne, is how to engage with these civil servants that like are really in between all these different opinions and try to make one report with all of them together, and how to inform them such that they give some sort of license to do this.
Yep. Marianne, over to you.
That is a super important question, because all politicians know who actually decides, and it's not them. So working with, on a regular basis, building relationships over time and giving them super information, being the trustworthy source, never ever be caught in saying something too easy or exaggerating or bending the truth. You need to be super, super trustworthy over time. And also what I see is that when you talk to one politician, I know he or she is going to turn around to somebody in an institution that they trust. So what we need to figure out is how to get to the person the politician trusts before the politician asks them. So you make sure that the answer they get is an informed answer. So working with the civil servants, super duper important, and doing it properly.
Super. Right. One last question before we move to John's video. We had a hand at the very back. Sorry. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. My name is Cody. I'm based at the University of Oxford, and I do some stakeholder engagement, public perception research. And what I've sort of noticed in working on a project with some other researchers is we've been getting emails, and of course there's a lot of talk about also like conspiracy theories and sort of chemtrails, you know, this kind of stuff, and it's not going away really, and it seems to be growing in my own perception, not only in the US where I'm from, but also in the UK where there's lots of funding being put into the space right now. And so yeah, I guess my sort of position towards, say, like usually around climate conspiracy or denialism is to avoid it and not engage with those people, but it seems like with SRM, we can't avoid the conspiracies. We have to, especially doing public engagement work, or when you're doing, especially around projects. Like, so I'm just wondering if you guys had insights or thoughts about how to engage with conspiracy theories, and when people are talking about conspiracy theories, perhaps in these sort of engagements.
I'll take it. So we're going to move to the video, but yes, we are going to on that particular topic. So one of the things that we've done is to look into conspiracy theories. And there was a paper published in a journal called iScience, and it's actually looking specifically at conspiracy theories and geoengineering. It was featured in Time magazine because it was basically opening it up by sort of saying that there is an issue in this particular field. And the headline being that we think it's important for people to be aware of the fact that the voices who are making comments on geoengineering or that climate engineering are actually the same voices talking about MAGA, Trump, anti-vax, chemtrails, the whole lot, because it may just have some bearing on the level of credence that people then place on those comments. So it's really important to call it out, and there's a research paper on this which I would encourage people to have a look at. So it was in iScience. The first author was Ramit Debnath. We do need to move to the video because we're all due downstairs at the same time as well. So John, over to you. Thanks.
I don't know if the sound comes. The sound does fish up.
Very good. Okay, let's start from the beginning.
Tick-tock. I hear the ticking, beating, the heart, my heart.
Thanks for everyone for coming. You're free to leave or stay. Thank you. Good job.
There are now more than 8 billion people on this earth. The mass of humans has reached 10 times the mass of wild mammals, and human-induced climate changes are already happening. The world is not on track to reach the Paris Agreement goals, and global temperature rise can reach up to 2.8 degrees higher by the end of the century. A worldwide overview from October 2022 identifies 16 major global climate tipping points. While consequences are global, almost all will happen in cold places on the planet. They include changes in northern oceans, the Arctic ice coverage, the Greenland and Antarctic ice caps, glaciers, the tundra, and the permafrost, all with global consequences.
Melting Greenland ice raised global sea levels by 0.5 millimetre per year over the last 50 years. This is accelerating. By the end of the century, the rates will be 10 or even 100 times faster.
My relationship with the land and the ice is important to me because it helps me get to my destination.
We use ice in so many ways. We travel on it. We go to our camping grounds, hunting grounds, to travel to the flow edge, and even to travel to another community.
Amazon da chante sin nach katman da beesu.
Tipping points lead to abrupt, irreversible, and dangerous impacts with serious implications for humanity. Cities like Jakarta, Miami, Bangkok, Amsterdam, and some island nations like the Maldives and Kiribati are at risk with even modest sea level rise. Climate change will leave vast areas of land uninhabitable and force millions of people to find new homes. Mass migration towards the Earth's poles will happen.
Shrubs and trees are now spreading into our tundra, gathering sun energy in a spiral of warming. While reindeer grazing can slow it, science is now raising hard concerns for our animals, our ecosystems, and our homeland.
Antonio Guterres says, our world is in big trouble. We are at full speed towards climate hell with our full steam on the accelerator. We must act now and address these issues. Stop, mitigate, and adapt to the rapidly changing climate. The University of the Arctic is the world's largest network, focusing exclusively on education, research, and academic collaboration in and about the Arctic. A unique aspect of this cooperation is the inclusion of indigenous peoples and their traditional knowledge as key for identifying future solutions. Join UArctic in stopping climate change and avoiding irreversible tipping points. Let's save our mother together.
Those that give up are sure to lose.
Tick-tock. I hear the ticking, beating, the heart, my heart, or the earth's, the earth, my mother's heart, the earth, mother, my mother.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your attention.